Hi, this is Greg Kesich. I'm the editorial page editor at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with Alan Caron and Bill Nemitz, and it's a lot of news going on. We're trying to keep abreast of it. The first thing I hope we could talk about is the budget standoff in Augusta. Bill, you had a good column about that on Sunday.
Yeah, what struck me about it as we head into the final stretches here is, in particular with the budget, is how the people's opinion doesn't seem to matter. I mean, everybody, the starting point for dealing with education funding was, I suppose it was when Sarah Gideon came up with the House alternative, whereby they trimmed the 3% surcharge on incomes over $200,000 down to 1.75%, and then they raised the threshold from $200,000 up to $300,000. At the same time, they raised the sales tax, they raised the lodging tax to make up for all this stuff. And what struck me about it was, on the one hand, obviously the Democrats are trying to play nice and trying to show that they can compromise and all that. But the starting point for these negotiations was that the 3%, $200,000, as voted on by a majority of Maine voters last November, goes right out the window before they even sit down and start hardball negotiating. So that, coupled with the ranked choice situation, which is a little different because they have the law court opinion on that. But nevertheless, there's a big push, particularly on the Republican side, to just outright repeal that because the law court had a problem with it.
Part of it.
With part of it, yeah, right, with part of it. The part that deals with state general elections. It just leaves me thinking, we've heard all this talk and complaining about citizen initiatives, and I'm starting to think that this is the new reactive strategy to them, and that is just ignore them.
Yeah.
Make pretend it didn't happen. And that seems to be what's happening with these two pieces. These are pieces of legislation. These are state laws right now, as passed by the voters. And you're hard-pressed to find anybody up there who will at least acknowledge that.
Well, these questions were all very big issues, big pieces of law that were the kind of thing that the legislature hasn't been capable of doing for the last several terms. And part of it is, divided government. You really need to be able to dig in and compromise to get things done in a divided government, and we just haven't had that kind of leadership. So step one, you have a dysfunctional legislature that can't get big things done. Step two, you get citizen-initiated laws that gets things done. And then step three, you have the legislature undoing what the people just did.
Right, and it becomes kind of a spin cycle. But what I find most troubling is that once again, the voter is the one who's being disenfranchised here. And the voters thought they did something. They thought they did a couple of things last November, and here we are in June, and not so much. Those things aren't really going. If they survive, they're certainly not going to survive in the form that the voters intended.
Right. And who could imagine this, really? I mean, 10 years, even 10 years ago, the legislature would never touch a referendum vote. That? I mean, maybe 5 years later, they would tinker with something, but it was considered political suicide and the wrong thing to do. No, this is a relatively new phenomenon.
I seem to remember when that was you're right, untouchable.
You couldn't. And I blame it in part not on a dysfunctional legislature, but on the absence of executive leadership.
Yeah.
But all of these things, the more major issues coming up via referendum, the legislature not being able to pull itself together around major issues because there's no direction from the top. And by the way, the guy at the top is the one who set this in motion by refusing to enact the bonds that voters had voted, which, again, that's something that never happened that I was aware of before this administration. So he set the tone. Disregard what the voters say, we know better, and now legislators have adopted the tone.
Right, it becomes kind of the way we do business.
Yeah, it's optional.
Yeah. So I have a suggestion, and I'm not going to demand credit for this idea, but I'm going to throw it out there, and the legislators can do it. How about a constitutional amendment that gets rid of direct democracy, pass it, send it out to the voters. If the voters vote it down, then in the future, when there's a referendum, you know what you're supposed to do, which is pass what the voters said. If people are really doubt that their capacity to decide complicated issues, they can get rid of it. I mean, we didn't have this in the Constitution in 1820. It's something that came out of the progressive movement at the end of the 19th century. Many, many years went by where there was no referendums at all.
Oh, many years, yeah.
In decades,
That's right. It's interesting, back when it passed, I learned this last week in 1908, the big question was whether they were going to include constitutional amendment as part of a citizens' initiative process. And they didn't do it. And the reason they didn't do it was because they were scared to death that the citizens would repeal prohibition.
Right.
And so otherwise, look at ranked choice.
Yeah.
Had the constitutional amendment been included, they could have, in addition to passing ranked choice, simultaneously amended the Constitution to allow it. But Neil Dow, the old prohibitionist, nipped that in the bud.
Nip.
Well, I have a slightly less ambitious way for the legislature to deal with this. One is if you have a problem with the referendum process, fix it.
Yeah.
Take it up and fix it, and stop using that excuse, which is this just below the surface excuse for all of this. Oh, it's not a legitimate process. Oh, the special interest.
I mean, a good argument could be made for raising the threshold, number of signatures, looking at how signatures are gathered, paid signatures, all those kind of things. I think those are all fair game for discussion and negotiation.
The irony to me is Republicans for a decade used this political strategy of advancing referendums around taxes over and over and over again to galvanize the base and to seize power. And none of it really worked. And you'll remember that LePage promised a year ago that he was going to do 4 or 5 referendums, and they were going to, none of them worked. But now Democrats have learned to use this same process, mostly through the MPA and some other groups, and Republicans hate it.
Yeah.
But it's what they tried to do and couldn't do successfully. So, I mean, I think the real problem, again, is this vacuum in leadership in which interest groups on the right and left are basically putting forward their best idea and using the process to get it through.
And unsullied by the legislative process. No, there's no give and take. You write your question
that's right.
In a self-serving way.
Right. And there's a presumption the legislature would stall it or defeat it. So you simply go around the legislature.
Yeah, and once you get it past the Secretary of State, you're home free. As long as you can get the wording on the ballot, it's a done deal.
So if you want to fix that process, fix it. Right. Have the conversation, do it. And here's another thing. We ought to have a law, maybe there is already, you guys will know better than I, that does not allow the governor to ignore the will of the voters on bonds. That whole provision that they have exploited around all these bonds, it ought to be removed, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think that's, you talk about obstructionism. I mean,
it's, the governor has to have some leeway about when the bonds are sold because there could be adverse market conditions that would interfere, would put the state in a bad position if they had to issue them automatically. But he's taken that to say he can hold them for 5 years, and after 5 years they just expire.
Yeah. So make that a six-month flexibility.
Well, it's like a veto that can't be challenged.
Right. Exactly.
And a veto of something that's already been approved by the voters.
Right.
So this is his last budget, and in some ways, we're talking about Governor LePage. This might be his kind of his swan song in a way. I mean, he's certainly going to make a lot of noise, but he's not the figure that he has been in the past.
We use that term rather loosely right now. His budget. What budget has been his budget?
Right.
I mean, up until now. But you're right. It's the last cycle. But I think he's at least, if not more, irrelevant to the process now than he's ever been. I mean, because everybody knows that you need the 2/3 both to pass the legislation, and then you got to hold that 2/3 to get past the inevitable veto. So if that's the only power, only leverage that he has, and everybody starts from the point of, okay, we need a workaround here, we got to get around that, then it really just kind of relegates him off to the sidelines. And I don't see him having any more impact on this one than he has in the past.
But as Alan's pointed out, he's next year's an election year, and nothing's going to happen really then. Especially, it's a very wide open election year with a open gubernatorial seat, and it's starting to take shape a little bit. We're starting to get an idea.
But just to finish this, I've been stunned by how irrelevant, although we've all been talking about it for a while, how irrelevant the governor has become, and it's sort of symbolically made clear by his attention to the NIPS issue, which, however you feel about the merits of these bottles, to have a major fight in your last few weeks of having any influence, you make as a major fight, what's going to happen with tiny little bottles of liquor?
Well,
it's astonishing.
I have applauded his, however long it took him to come to this position, where he finally said, I'm going to ban them outright if you override my veto, and here we are. I think if my biggest problem with the NIPS has been what he finally arrived at in the end, and that is that we're dealing with people drinking and driving.
Right.
I mean, that's the underlying assumption to the whole thing. So why not ban them?
But it's a littering bill.
I know.
And
I
it doesn't really
that.
deal with drinking and driving. Right. And if he wanted to have participate in the process, this is, I think, why this issue is so fascinating is because it's so simple. This happens with the budget on it's a three-dimensional chess game, but this was very simple. He chose not to participate in the process. The industry came into the legislature and said, we can't live with a 15-cent deposit. Tom Saviello met with them. He met with the environmental groups. They came up with an alternative.
Kumbaya all around.
They did exactly what you want a legislature to do. And then whoa! It's like, the Wicked Witch who wasn't invited to the christening, and suddenly it's like there's a curse on everything.
But that's why I liked what he did, because the whole time they were doing that,
I'm banging my head against the wall saying, these people are behind the wheel. Why doesn't anybody address this? And he kind of, I don't know, I guess he kind of stumbled across that argument when he ran out of other ones.
His initial one was that it would be bad for business to have a 5-cent deposit. So therefore, I'm going to wipe out the business. Right. And the business is like, no, that's not good for us.
We kind of like it. It's okay.
Right. They sold 7 million.
Thanks for your help.
Last year, 7 million of those little bottles, and they think they're going to sell 12 million.
When was the last time you saw somebody buy, a big 750-liter bottle of Fireball? The market's not
just
there.
For the connoisseurs, I guess.
I wouldn't. I don't want to pay the deposit.
I should say, not liter.
But anyway, so yes, we're enjoying the NIPS, the great NIPS debate of 2017. But
yes. Closing act.
Yeah, what's happening with the gubernatorial race?
Well, I don't know. I'll start it off. I think there's great stuff. I'm still interested in what Susan Collins is going to do. I think we have all agreed that's the big play. And if she comes in, we talked about this last week, I'm increasingly interested in whether she's going to remove herself from the Republican Party and not go through that gauntlet in the primary and face these angry far-right folks who are not happy with her in Washington and never have been happy with her any more than they were Olympia Snowe. So I think that's something worth watching. She says she'll tell us in the fall. Then, of course, if she runs, what happens to LePage? Does LePage name himself to that seat? We've talked about that before. I think that's all great stuff. Aside from that, we've got 150 people apparently all interested in running. And it's hard to see how any of them will break out.
Yeah. This time next year, I think, is going to be Mary Mayhew's moment in the sun. Because I think you're right. Those people about whom you're talking, I think, at this point, are likely to rally around her because they want 8 more years. And that, in a primary, is a very, very formidable bunch of people. So can Susan Collins beat her in a primary? I mean, everybody looks at Collins, 70+% in elections, approval, whatever it might be, and think that she's absolutely unbeatable. But if you start slicing up the electorate that way, and if you look at some of the things that are going on in Washington, where she's being cast as the moderate, or sometimes I think inaccurately, but the middle of the road person. That's not what these people want to hear.
No,
right?
they hate that stuff.
They don't like that at all.
I said this last week. I think it's the most dangerous path for her to take if she wants to be governor right now in this time period is to run in the Republican primary.
Can you imagine what a crushing defeat that would be?
To lose a primary.
Give up your Senate
That
seat.
would be
and
the
lose
end.
primary.
Well, you don't
No.
have to give it up.
Well, that's
Because
true.
she's not up
That's
this
true.
year. I mean,
Not
she could
by
lose
the
a
primary.
primary, but go back to Washington without that. I'm the most popular senator in my state. That gives her some clout.
Well, she could also say, I prevented Paul LePage from becoming a senator by keeping my seat.
You're welcome. I think of her as a real Republican. I don't think of her as an opportunist. I think of her as somebody who really believes in old-fashioned Republican values, and I have a hard time imagining her just saying that this road is closed to me, and I'm going to go independent. And it can be done. Ronald Reagan's line, right? I didn't leave the Democratic Party; the party left me. She could make that case, but she has always been a team player Republican, which is what people on the left really don't like about her.
I had a conversation with her earlier this spring, and you are so right on that, because it got into this whole issue of party. And she went off on about a 2 or 3 minute soliloquy about what the Republican Party means to her, what it's meant to her family. And you listen when politicians talk about these things, and there's always a skeptical one ear. You're listening with a skeptical ear, and that struck me as one of the most genuine things I've ever heard her say. It was so from the heart. And it just came across as so believable that I remember thinking to myself, no, she's never going to bolt from the Republican Party. It's in her DNA. And so I think it would be a very difficult decision for her to make to run as an independent.
Yeah, look, I think it's a long shot, but I think it's more of a shot than I ever felt before. And I think she is, and always has been, a passionate Republican. But if she decides to run and she runs into immediate, difficult turbulence, remember that Olympia Snowe wasn't going to resign the Senate either until she went into those meetings in Lewiston, and they were vilifying her. And all of a sudden, out came a decision that none of us could anticipate. Now, I don't see that happening with Susan Collins, but I could see in that moment she and people close to her saying, this is crazy.
It would be interesting if she ran in the primary to see, at long last, we would have
at least the prospect of Susan Collins pushing back on the LePage legacy. And it was something that she's been very, very careful not to do. But if she was in a head-to-head pitched fight with Mary Mayhew, and you can throw in Rick Bennett or whoever else might be there, but if this was really come down to a long overdue fight for the soul of Maine's Republican Party, it would be very refreshing and very interesting to hear, at long last, her critique on the past 8 years in Augusta.
And that's the race she'd have to run. She couldn't suddenly move to the right as you traditionally would do to win the primary vote. She'd have to run this. We need a new direction.
You can't out Mary Mayhew.
No.
So I just want to observe that we spent almost the entire segment talking about Susan Collins, which is the problem for every other candidate who's thinking about running for this, because she really is the figure that gets everybody's attention. And if you're like an Adam Cody or a Mary Mayhew, you've got to be wondering, when do I get my turn to?
How about Adam Cody? I've got a bunch of friends that have been meeting with him. They're very impressed. He's kind of a moderate. He has a profile. He looks to me, I don't know him, I've never met him, but he looks to me like the kind of Democrat who actually could win a statewide election.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I've known him for years.
Right, and the problem is, how does he get through the Democratic primary?
Well, he's out there. He's very busy. He's got his family out with him. I just saw that it was kind of a test run.
He's got my family out with him. He's got my daughter who works for him, so she's out on the.
They just did a video on the front steps, and it was about a local school bond in Sanford, which is coming up to a vote
this week, and he had his wife and the 5 kids all on the front steps, and he delivers the message, and then the kids chime in, and I watched it about 3 times, just looking for a flaw, because he's new to politics, and honest to God, I couldn't find one. And I said to my wife, this is the audition, not the audition, but this is the rehearsal for a statewide ad, and it's going to be along the same line, because you see this family together, you see those kids, and I really think this is something that a lot of people have been longing for, is some return to normalcy. Yeah. And if there's one thing that this family projects, it's that they are a very loving, decent, normal family. Yeah. And he could go a long way on those ads.
Yeah. But the question is, can he go a long way in the Democratic primary?
Right.
It's the same problem we just talked about with Susan on the Republican side. These primaries, the Democrats really, there's just 2 factions of the primary voters on the Democratic side. Those who want a steeped in 30 years of Democratic insider politics, does that element, and there's the element that wants somebody, the Bernie crowd.
Well, yeah,
so how do they resolve around the Cody?
Yeah. I mean, my concern for if I was with Cody would be that not so much him, but do people really want to be brought together? I run into so much anger and people who are not looking to compromise, people who are not trying to, it's a question of, do you tolerate people who are different than you, or do you want to dominate them? And I'm seeing lots of people who want to dominate, who want their side to win. And everybody they talk to agrees with them, so therefore they think that that they've got the muscle behind them. And a candidate like either Susan Collins or Adam Cody, who says, I can bring people together, I can work with the other side, is that a compelling message in this environment? And I'm hoping that I'm wrong and you're right.
I think that the one thing that can trump that, no pun intended, is integrity. And I think that's the one. If there's one thing that there's a yearning for across the political spectrum right now, I think it's a sense that a feeling of integrity when it comes to the people we put in these leadership positions. And so I think that if you come in to a race like this oozing integrity, and you don't have a lot of sharp, jagged partisan edges, you're not going to win over the LePage people ever. But you are going to appeal to that middle segment of the electorate that is just so damn tired of not feeling like there's anybody in whom someone they can fall in behind, somebody who is not up there for all the wrong reasons. And that's, if he is to make it past a primary, I think that would be his biggest asset going into a general.
I agree with all that if he was in a general election.
Right.
And if he was running as an independent, he'd be guaranteed to be in a general election. I think this guy, again, as little as I know about him, everything I hear, would be the guy. I think he would.
Which is why it's going to be really interesting to see if ranked choice
is in fact in effect during the primary.
Right. I mean, he's the kind
because
of candidate
that's going to be
who would really
big,
benefit.
big factor. Yeah.
So before we go, I wanted to talk about what's going on in Washington, especially last week and coming ahead with the Senate Intelligence Committee. Both of our senators had their kind of, star turns last week. Angus King had 2 of them. He had one with Admiral Rogers and where he was like the disappointed dad, like what you feel is not relevant, young man. We'll put that dent in the fender.
You're waiting for him to ground Rogers.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched last week, and I remember Angus King saying to me a couple of months ago that everything he'd done in his career had prepared him for where he is now. And I got feeling everything where he is now has prepared him for last week. I mean, he had a bonkers week. He really became a national figure and a favorite of national media. And so I think that's not stuff that goes away overnight, and he can build on it. And I think Susan Collins has also had a really great couple of weeks, but Angus was further behind in terms of the national recognition. He's not that any longer.
His handling of Rogers was reminiscent of George Mitchell with Ollie North.
Right.
One of those moments where
you look at these hearings and you've got a lot of scurrying going on. You've got a lot of aides in the background around their, on their phones or whatever it might be. And it's kind of a beehive, even as the hearing is going on. And when he went after Rogers, I played it back a couple of times and tried to look peripherally at as many people as I could. And that room was riveted on that exchange. And I think that he really, and it was funny because it could not have been that rehearsed, because it would all play it off Rogers saying, I don't feel I can do that. And, lawyer that he is, it is core. King saw that and pounced on it, and it was really
I got a chance to
effective.
talk to him on Friday and asked him about that, and he said, I'm fairly junior on the committee, so I come with questions prepared, but mainly what I do is listen to what the other people are asking. And so he was coming back, following up on a previous
That's
refusal.
correct. That had already been raised, yeah.
Which is, you can tell it's very unusual. A lot of those guys come in and they just take out their paper and they read the 5 questions that they were going to read.
And he did the same thing with Comey.
Yes.
And he asked Comey a question that had been asked, did you feel like you were being coerced, or paraphrasing, but that was it. And that question had been asked 2 or 3 times. But the way King asked it, and the way King slightly led the witness, that was the exchange that ended up on all the network news that night, because King crystallized the question and got that answer from Comey that everybody had been trying to get before, which is very astute. You're right, he's studying people.
It was a brilliant job. He was brilliant on his feet, I thought, on Wednesday in particular. By the way, and incidentally, I wrote a column a week ago, Sunday, about Democrats supporting Angus, and those who've been around a while will appreciate the response I got, and I got a lot of letters about it and some online stuff. Just about every letter from a Democrat was, we're already working for him. I didn't like him, but I do now. Our committee's going to take this up. Got forwards from the state committee and the executive director saying, we are not encouraging any other Democrat to run in this race. And I didn't get one Democratic message making the argument that Democrats should have another candidate.
I got a
Not
letter to the
one.
editor.
You did?
Well, I got one. Yeah, Alan.
From Tom Connolly?
Yeah.
It was astonishing, though,
It wasn't
really.
the name I recognized, but it did not. It was a single
Yeah.
complaint, and it's. I think the Democrats are defending 24 seats or 25 seats.
6, I think.
26 seats.
Yeah.
So
They've got no room to maneuver.
No, this is the
You
good.
don't want to mess
They're
up.
going to have to. It's like winning the trifecta. Everything's going to have to be perfect.
Yeah, and so that seems unlikely. I mean, and then I think Susan Collins, to me, she got one of the most interesting pieces of information from the whole Comey hearing was, she said, did you show the memos to anybody else? And he said, yeah, I gave it to my friend, and he released it. Because I wanted to force them to hire a special prosecutor. I'm like, man, this guy, do not get into a bureaucratic knife fight with this guy. He's a samurai master. He's like, cuts your arms and legs off and writes a memo and puts a memo in the file.
Did you see Collins trying very hard, how her eyes never flinched? I kept waiting for her eyes to bug wide open, because she wasn't expecting that answer, but she was, no reaction whatsoever. She handled it very well.
Yeah.
Because that was really, arguably, the lead, from that whole thing.
But right, so I think it's interesting, right? It's the Intelligence Committee seems to be very focused on this one question, and I hope that they're looking beyond this campaign. Because as entertaining as I found this, I thought that if I was going to join a conspiracy with anybody, it wasn't going to be these guys. They look lame. Like, who do you trust? You're going to trust Trump with your secrets? And General Flynn, and really, they didn't need any help from the Trump campaign. It's all the other ties that go beyond the campaign that I think I hope that they're going to look at.
And when this thing fractures, and I think it will, and when among all these players, when self-interest becomes the primary motivation for all of them.
Right, and this is a group of very greedy people.
Right. You think it's a circus now.
Yeah.
Wait till they all with their own lawyers in their ears. Wait till they all start turning on one another. Wait till they all start cutting deals with Mueller, and it's just going to be amazing.
And how about the president saying 100% he's willing to testify, and then today they're saying, his lawyers saying, well, we might not want to cooperate with this investigation that much. Well, good luck with that strategy. Once again, you've got the boss's words that everyone will put up on the screen while you're trying to say the opposite thing.
You can see Trump taking the oath, so help me God, you're fired.
Well, it's going to be entertaining. We'll see it play out, and we'll have more to talk about next week, I'm sure.
Without a doubt.
This is a Press Herald podcast. You can hear past episodes at pressherald.com/podcasts. You can subscribe on iTunes, on Android devices, and stream on Stitcher. Please email comments and questions to letterstotheeditor@pressherald.com. Thank you for listening.